The Sunday School lesson for November 22nd is Act Faithfully. The main point of the lesson is God is greater than those who oppose you. The focal passage is Daniel chapter 6, verses 6 through 10, verses 13 through 16, and verses 19 through 22. This is the last lesson in a series of lessons entitled Game Changer, How to Impact Your World. The series is focused on positive behaviors that make us make a difference, to help us make a difference in the world around us. The lessons have focused on a need to develop conviction, pray fervently, stand courageously, live humbly, and confront sin. We have seen how Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah lived out these disciplines as exiles in a foreign and often hostile land. We close the series with Act Faithfully. As we think about acting faithfully, think about your daily habits. Is there something that you do the same way every day? Every morning, the first thing that I do is fix a pot of coffee. It is such a habit that I can do it with my eyes closed, and in reality, I probably have done it pretty close to that already. Some habits exist from the practical demands of our lives. Other habits arise from custom and preference. But do you have any spiritual habits? Are there things that you routinely do that contribute to your walk with God? Some positive spiritual habits include daily Bible study and prayer. Daniel incorporated positive spiritual habits into his own life. He was well known as a faithful man that lived according to his faith in God. Those habits would become a point of contention, but they also enabled his deep faith that would overcome his opponents. In Daniel 5, we saw the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. It was conquered and absorbed into the empire of the Medes and Persians. The king of the Medo-Persian Empire is called Darius the Mede. Historians like to argue about the identity of Darius the Mede, and this has been one of the passages used to dispute the authenticity of the book of Daniel. Most of the problems can be resolved once it is realized that Darius is more of a title than a first name. In the same way that Candace, Queen of Ethiopia, was actually a title, or Pharaoh was a title. Darius was much more of a title or a name that was assumed by kings. Additionally, kings were often known by multiple names and titles if they ruled combined kingdoms. Daniel calls him Darius the Mede because his mother was from the kingdom of Mede. The Jewish way of reckoning ancestry is through the mother's lineage that your ancestry is reckoned. His father was Persian, and among the Persians, Darius was known as Cyrus the Persian. When Darius conquered Babylon, he absorbed the government administration into his own government. Darius recognized the skilled administrators that were already present and decided not to reinvent the wheel. Many of the administrators were like Daniel and were not Babylonian by birth. They had no trouble transferring their allegiance to the new king. Daniel 6:1 says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage." Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. Darius appointed 120 satraps, is the term, basically as governors or princes over the kingdom, and there are various ranks. They're not all the same equal rank. It depend on their position, where they were in the country, but 120 officials scattered throughout the kingdom. Then he set 3 grand commissioners over the governors. Daniel, who's advanced in age, was appointed as one of the grand commissioners. Daniel had an outstanding reputation throughout the Babylonian Empire, as well as he was a well-trained and wise man. His talents were recognized, and he was given charge over 1/3 of the kingdom. He quickly distinguished himself as the best administrator in the kingdom, and Darius considered turning over the day-to-day operation of the kingdom to Daniel. Essentially, Darius was considering making Daniel his chief of staff or his prime minister. All seemed to be going well. Now, there are a handful of ways to get ahead in the world. You can work hard and distinguish yourself to gain advancement. This was the approach of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. However, that's not the fast way to the top. You can also advance in the world at someone else's expense. That is a faster way, and many people try to make it to the top by sabotaging others. Some of the other administrators wanted to get ahead, and they saw Daniel as an obstacle. They may have been jealous of his success. Whatever the reason, they wanted to get him out of their way. They began to investigate Daniel in order to find some flaw with him. Sounds like modern politics. They did their best to find some mistake or corruption in Daniel's work, but there was none. Daniel was a truly honest man. Daniel 6:4, then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. He did his work well. He didn't make mistakes. Not only that, there was no corruption. They could not find an error in his work or his personal ethics. They realized that they could not attack him due to some flaw, so they sought to find a manner of attack through his virtue. Daniel 6:5, then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. They were well aware that Daniel was a Jew and that his beliefs were different from the rest of the administrators. Daniel was the lone monotheist among the upper-level administrators. His opponents decided to attack him through that difference. Verse 6, then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he did aforetime. The top administrators, which included the other 2 grand commissioners and a bunch of the governors, approached the king. This would not have been all of the officials, as a lot of them were off doing their jobs. However, it was probably a significant number of the higher-ranking governors. And the rest of the governors probably would have no problem with this proposal that was presented by this group. They saluted the king and asked for a royal decree that for 30 days all prayers should be addressed to Darius. They falsely claimed that all the government officials supported the decree. Daniel was not present because he was off doing his job and couldn't be there to object. The decree did not acknowledge that Darius was a god. They weren't saying that Darius was a god, but essentially they were making him the high priest of the kingdom. A priest is a mediator between people and God, and what they were saying is the only priest for any of the gods will be Darius. He would be the only authorized mediator between man and God for a month. Now, most ancient peoples would not have objected to this command. Many cultures regarded their kings as having some divine connection. The Egyptians believed that the Pharaoh was a son of the gods and would become a god. And besides that, it was only for 30 days. Now, Daniel and the Jews would object to this because the only authorized people to be priests were Levites of the line of Aaron. Those were the only priests, and actually by this time they had to be of the line of Zadok. Descended from Aaron, descended from Zadok within the tribe of Levi. Those were the only high priests and priests that were allowed. And beside that, the Jews also knew that they could pray directly to God, and they did not need a pagan king as their mediator. But the idea sounded good to Darius. It appealed to his ego, for one thing. Also, he probably viewed it as a good test of loyalty. Ancient kingdoms often did things like this. Later on in the Roman Empire, good citizens would be required to say Caesar is Lord. And at first that was just an acknowledgement that Caesar was in charge, but later on it was the idea that Caesar was actually divine, and they were trying to get people to worship Caesar as God. Now, most people didn't believe that Caesar was a god. Some did. There was a significant presence of emperor cults, especially in Asia Minor, as well as in Italy. But for the most part, people just went along with it because it was a sign of loyalty. It was synonymous in their day and age with patriotism. So Darius is asking for a patriotic act more than anything else. And it would be something that he would be able to know who was loyal to him and who wasn't. And he readily agreed to the decree, which could not be reversed once it was established. Again, he didn't realize that the Jews in his kingdom could not comply with the command. The administrators, they didn't care about the rest of the Jews. They were targeting Daniel, and Darius didn't see that. A lot of times laws get enacted, and the further consequences of those laws is not immediately apparent to the lawmakers. Sometimes laws get passed and the consequences hit, and then the lawmakers, you'll see them on TV saying, well, we never intended this. It's because you didn't fully think it out. Well, Darius didn't fully think it out. It sounded like a good idea. His loyal administrators were putting it forward, and they were pushing it, and so he went along with it. Now, Daniel heard the decree and knew that he was the target. He could have attempted to pray in secret. He could have passed by 30 days, no problem. But he decided to face the conflict head on. He went home and began to pray openly to God without invoking the name of Darius. Two important points need to be made. First, Daniel was not praying for show. Jesus condemned the Pharisees who made a public show of prayer. Matthew 6:5. And when thou prayest, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are. For they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, and they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But thou, when thou prayest, enter in thy closet, and when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret. And thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly. Everyone knew that Daniel prayed to God and that he was sincere in his prayers. Daniel's not trying to impress anybody and put on a show with his prayers. He was not praying openly in order to boast about his piety or righteousness. He was conducting his regular prayer, and he was not ashamed to pray. There are times for public and private prayer. In both instances, the focus of our prayer should be God and not to impress the people around us. Second, Daniel was not seeking to provoke the king. Daniel was obedient to the law so long as it did not conflict with the commands of God. In North Africa during the 4th century AD, there was a small heretical group of Christians that thought that martyrdom was the ultimate expression of faith. In order to ensure martyrdom, some of its members would take clubs and attack Roman officials or legionnaires. The church condemned this as unchristlike and just plain stupid. It is one thing to die for your faith, but it is quite another to die because you whack somebody with a club. Christians are encouraged to be good citizens as long as it does not violate God's word. There come times in cultures and societies when people want to just be rebels and they want to stir up trouble. Christians are not supposed to take that approach when it comes to dealing with the world. We are to be good citizens and really model citizens so long as the law does not violate God's command. Now, prayer was a normal part of Daniel's life. 3 times a day, Daniel would kneel before God in prayer. He would open his window and face toward Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the site of the temple, and he still regarded it as the site of God's city. He also did it 3 times a day. That became the standard Jewish practice, is to pray 3 times a day. Usually first thing in the morning, midday, and then at night before you went to bed. And Daniel prayed at least 3 times a day, regularly. But Daniel also knew that his life was in danger, but still he offered up thanks to God. Now the last phrase of verse 10 is important. It says he prayed as he did aforetime. In other words, this was the normal pattern of Daniel's life. He was engaged in regular, consistent prayer, and he would not change, even if his life was at stake. Now, Daniel's opponents had conspired to spy on Daniel, and they didn't have to wait long to hear Daniel's prayers, and they immediately reported him to the king. Daniel 6:13. Then answered they and said before the king, That Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men assembled unto the king and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is, that no decree or statute which the king establisheth may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of the lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. The informants did not single out anyone else but Daniel. There were other faithful Jews who did not submit to the decree, but they were irrelevant. The decree had been manipulated to get rid of Daniel. And as soon as they made the report to the king, he realized the truth of the situation. You notice he's not mad at Daniel, he's mad at himself. He's been tricked. They have manipulated him, and they've manipulated the king to get rid of his best servant. He tried to find some way to spare Daniel, but the decree was specific. Further, once the Persian king made a decree, it could not be revoked. There were times when a counter law could be invoked to mitigate the effects of the first law. This was a solution implemented in the book of Esther. In Esther, a law had been decreed that permitted the Jews to be attacked and plundered, basically exterminated. That decree could not be revoked, but then the king made a decree that the Jews could defend themselves and gave them imperial support to give them the advantage. And those that did attack the Jews were wiped out themselves. Darius sought some way to rescue Daniel from the decree, but he could not find a way out. He couldn't figure out a counter command that would save him. And at the end of the day, Daniel's enemies forced the king's hand. The law had to be obeyed, and Daniel had to be cast into the lion's den. Even as the king condemned Daniel to the lion's den, he hoped that Daniel's God would save him. This is an amazing statement of faith. Perhaps he had heard the stories of how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been saved from Nebuchadnezzar's wrath. Or perhaps he reasoned that a man as faithful as Daniel was to his God would be saved by that same God. Now, Darius would have believed that Daniel's God was one among many and that he may have had power, but his own faith in whether or not Daniel would be saved, it's not that he had a strong faith in God. He had strong faith in Daniel's faith. The king wanted Daniel to survive. Now Daniel was thrown into a den of lions, and a stone was placed on the entrance. Ancient Eastern kings often kept lions at their palaces. Lions were considered symbols of strength and power. At an early time, they were associated with kings and empires. In fact, that continued into modern times. Even in the 19th and 18th centuries, a lot of the kings of Europe kept lions as pets at their palaces, or had cages with lions and other fierce animals that they would keep. The modern day zoo started on royal grounds, as kings would often bring in exotic animals to demonstrate their power and wealth. The lions were very important to both the Babylonians and Persians. Lions were incorporated into both of their arts. The lion served as both a royal symbol, and they also served as a convenient way of dealing with capital criminals. Throughout the ancient world, fierce animals were used to execute prisoners. The king put Daniel in the lions, or ordered Daniel to be cast into the lion's den, and then the king placed his seal on the stone to ensure that it stayed in place. Soft clay or wax would have been placed at a spot where the stone joined the entrance. Then the king stamped the clay or wax with his signet ring, which was the same thing as his signature. This meant that the stone could not be removed without the king's express authorization. The king then returned to his palace, but his heart was heavy. He fasted throughout the evening and refused any entertainment. He couldn't even sleep that night because he was worried. The next morning, the king rose early to check on Daniel. Daniel 6:19. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. Forasmuch as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. At first light, the king rose and went to the lion's den. He called out for Daniel, though he didn't have much hope. He expected that the lions had torn Daniel to pieces. He called out with a troubled voice, asking if Daniel's God had spared him. Daniel replied confidently that he was fine. God had sent an angel to keep the lions calm. The lions had not harmed Daniel in any way. The king ordered Daniel released in order that the conspirators against Daniel be cast into the lions' dens with their families. No sooner had they hit the floor when the lions started chowing down on them. They've been fasting all night too. The king then issued a proclamation honoring the God of Daniel, and Daniel prospered under the reign of Darius. Daniel lived a faithful life that made an impression on the most powerful monarch of his day. Daniel's faith not only saw him through an immense crisis, but it also showed the king the power of Daniel's God. This would afford the Jews in the empire a high level of respect and protection. Faithful living does not always have a happy ending as far as the world is concerned. Our faith will put us in jeopardy because the world is opposed to God. Jesus warned that the world will reject his followers because the world rejected him. Regardless of how the world treats the righteous, God will be glorified and God will take control. In the 1st and 2nd century AD, the faithful died in tremendous numbers at the hands of the Romans. But God used their faithfulness to spread the gospel and transform the world. We are not currently in jeopardy, but we still need to act faithfully. This will put us in conflict with the world, but it is better to stand with God and receive his blessings than gain the approval of this world. Thank you for watching. I pray that this lesson has been informative and a blessing. Please share this lesson with others, and if you are able, I'd like to invite you to join us at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Ebenezer Baptist Church is located at 7305 Highway 166 in Douglasville, Georgia. Sunday school is at 9:45 a.m. and morning worship is at 11 a.m. We also have the evening worship on Sundays at 6 p.m. We have a weekly prayer meeting at 7 on Wednesdays. Additionally, if you have any questions about the lesson or have any prayer requests, please email me at pastorterrybraswell@gmail.com. Though I will note on November 22nd, we will not have an evening worship as we are having our Thanksgiving celebration that afternoon after the morning worship. You are invited to attend. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.